welcome to No More Study Stress, Emotional Resilience 101. Now really it should be managing study stress, or the theoretical possibility of eliminating study stress, and why that so will emerge. Yesterday, resilience came up in the keynote speaker, Peter Parker. I keep calling this, I remember Peter Parker, I keep on thinking of Spider-Man, but it's Peter Parks, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And he talked about emotional resilience as being the absolutely single critical factor in being able to predict success. And emotional resilience, kind of vaguely undefined internally, but certainly the evidence of it externally being in the way of facility and interacting with people, being able to exert social influence and being able to understand social cues and respond to them appropriately. And what we're talking more is kind of like Peter Parks Part 2 in a way now, and also even more in depth in the afternoon talk about making happy families. So we're going to talk about what it is, times and signs of high study stress, the kind of traditional ways, cognitive behavioral, sort of outside-in sorts of methods of dealing with study stress, what can amplify or reduce stress, and really looking at where stress really comes from. And if there's nothing else you leave with today, if you know the source of stress, you are ahead of 99.99% of the population. We're going to talk about creating an ideal learning environment for which your and their resilience is really useful. Thank you.
No worries.
And we're going to talk about the foundations of resilience and how you can use some really practical means of boosting that in yourselves and your children. And of course, there'll be resources, loads of books. We've been Potential Plus members since 2011. Potential Plus has been absolutely instrumental in helping our family get what our daughter needs, which is why I keep on giving back in this way, because will be grateful the rest of my life for the support they've offered us. Our daughter is 9.5 years old. She has been accelerated by 2 years, and it's very appropriate for her. Other people have different journeys and different things that are appropriate for them, but we wouldn't have had it without Potential Plus's help. I've got a PhD in psychology, and we've been contracted to revamp our school's policy. Of course, my name is Dr. Shoshana Garfield. Behind the camera is Dr. Sasha Mitrofanov. So between the two of us, Alea's got really good tutors. I'm also an attachment theory specialist. How many of you have heard of attachment theory? How many of you have no clue what attachment theory is? Okay, so a quick brief rundown of attachment theory is that it's not news that we're mammals, right? And all mammals share, when we're infants, little babies, kids, whatever, foals, whatever, we have a compulsory, profound, powerful desire to have proximity to a caregiver. Attachment is about proximity. Now, what happens after they get together, of course, can be extraordinarily unhealthy, as we know from humans, right? But it can also be very healthy. So I have expertise in healthy and very unhealthy kinds of attachment bonds. And that will play out in making happy families as well, of course. And a lot of expertise in psychological trauma recovery. I work mainly with people who have been very severely traumatized, things like tortured kind of stuff. And when you're in that deep end, I think what becomes really clear is that in order to recover from trauma, it's very important to know what happiness really is and where it comes from. And some of that will come up later as well. For all of us, we all have trauma in our everydays, and I'm not sure if that was in this presentation or later today. So I'll wait to see if it shows up and then I'll talk about it more. Okay, so what's study stress? What is study stress and where does it come from? What are your conceptions of this coming in? Okay, we come back together. What is study stress?
Knowing how to study.
You mean not knowing how to study?
Yeah,
or
if they've sort of got to research something, if the children just don't know how to research something themselves, you know, it's knowing where to get the information, and then they're panicking because they can't think.
Not knowing where to go, how to do it,
Yeah.
how to study.
structure there.
Brilliant.
Beliefs about themselves.
What kind of beliefs?
Oh, I'm no good at maths.
Yeah, not a very helpful belief, is it?
Unhelpful beliefs, yeah, that's it. Unhelpful beliefs.
Fear of the consequences if they don't know.
Absolutely. And because we're running out of whiteboard, we'll move to the next one. Yeah, we could spend a lot of time unpacking apathy.
Or a variation on that to try and get yourself in the right mindset, because that sounds very much into computer gaming. And it's almost a physical wrench to get him out of that mindset into, okay, we need to do some homework.
Time pressure, that they want to do other things. Sometimes also not knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
I handed in a 2,000-word essay the other day. It was only asked, they only asked for 600 words.
Yeah, our daughter does that too.
Could it be said to be anxiety of any kind that's arising from a study situation? Because those are all examples of things giving rise to the anxiety.
Well, certainly stress can be defined as anxiety, and anxiety tends to be oriented about the future. I've had a shoulder injury and I can't write up, so sorry for the handwriting.
Also, we've got fear of consequences, maybe from the parents, if parents have got a really pushing the child. So maybe it's fear of consequences, not only from the school, but from the parent.
Okay, the next question is, they kind of overlap, study stress, we've got where does it come from? External pressure.
And internal pressure.
External pressures, and we're going to summarize. We can summarize, but where else might you think it comes from?
Internal pressures.
Internal could be from the home or from themselves as well.
I'm thinking of internal really as the self.
Oh, you mean yourself?
Yeah, it's like as opposed to public and private external
right.
pressures. Private would be the family realm, the family domain. Mm.
There's one other source to me which is quite striking, and that's coming from teachers, because teachers get anxious and then they kind of push that onto the children to get anxious, that the children who weren't originally anxious become anxious.
Like the media as well.
Other children.
Yeah.
Or the parents.
Oh my God, so many sources of pressure.
There's also past performance. If you've always been top, then the only way is down.
And down means something,
Yes.
which we're going to talk about.
Sometimes those perceived external pressures are not actually coming externally, they're just the child's perception that this is what's expected of me, this is what people think, this is what's going to happen. And they're not real consequences, real external pressures.
And with that insightful contribution, we will draw a line under this slide. Thank you. So, a state of stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension. Now, most specialists in stress will also add what's in italics, resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances or circumstances perceived to be so, whether they are or not. We're going to debunk that during the course of this presentation. Where it is considered to come from, and a lot of externals usually get named. Sometimes, what didn't come up to, sometimes, especially in private schools, can get really overloaded with work, really too high expectations. Comparisons with others you have, and you've got all the others that we've listed here and far more. Well done. So, to also talk amongst yourselves, when do your children experience study stress most, and how do you know? Remember to think about your second question as well. How do you know they're stressed? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you know? If you can please share the kind of answers that have been coming up for you. When do your children experience study stress or study stress the most?
Monday morning when they've had a weekend to have done something and they do it just before they come to school.
So close to deadlines. Would that be okay to put down?
Too close to deadline.
One else?
Or when you start talking about homework with them.
The very mention of it. I heard fireworks. Yep.
Well, it's a subject about which they have preconceptions.
Mm. Can I put loaded subject? Would that be okay?
It's very much a loaded subject.
Can I ask, our daughter seems to get more stressed when we ask her how she's progressing with her studies. So that seems to stress her more than if she's left to get on with it. But she'd rather not share with us what she's doing. So I don't quite know how you define that, but the minute we try and find out.
Asked, how are you progressing? So what I'm hearing you say is that you, as a caring, involved parent, have asked the very reasonable question of how you getting on, honey?
Yeah.
And she's like, ah.
We get non-sort of aggression.
Yeah.
So it's obvious.
And there are a lot of nods around the room.
We've had one in the past where our son generally hasn't got particularly stressed until he's realised other people are worried, and then he thinks maybe he should be worried, which is just a straight. It's come out through conversations with his friends who were worried about exams last year, and then he got worried that he wasn't worried, which is just a really tricky one to deal with.
Knows other people are worried.
Yeah.
For this one, asked how are you progressing, how are you getting on, and getting that aggressive response. I'm so curious what's going on in that child's head. Yeah. So I was like, wow, what question did you hear me ask?
Yeah.
You know, but not at the moment, not then, when they're calm. It's like, you know, 2 days ago when I asked you and got really upset, I just really want to understand you better. You probably want to start with that first. I really want to understand you better. So is it okay if you help me do that? And then kids will generally say yes for that, because that's a big win for them. I say, you know, the other day, I really want to understand what you heard when I asked that. I'm really confused. Can you help me, sweetie? Is it without any pressure from you whatsoever, very tentative. Yeah, very humble. What else might you get for whens?
When there's too much work, or when they feel that there's too much work for them to do.
Too much work.
When they didn't bring it home.
Yeah, us too. One of the
variation on that is when they can't actually find it in their school bag.
Yeah, bring it home, can't find it.
Or when they can't find their school bag.
There's a funny thing about a lot of children in general, but exponentially so with children with higher learning potential, is that there's so much going on up there, that the world is a kind of magical, surreal place, and details are just so hard. Like homework, bringing your homework book home. We have that very much as well. And Mike, we even, yeah, and we've even got a checklist for her for when she comes home that we laminated.
With a marker pen that you have to tie to the bag.
And it still only works occasionally. And so, you know, you just do what you can and just know that I'll grow it eventually or not.
Yeah, when she's been asked to do something, no, sorry.
I'll get to you in a moment, and feel free.
Yeah, just if they're being asked to do something they don't want to do. So the theory behind that is you know, why should I do it? So a lot of working out in the head as to, you know, I've got ideas about how I want to do things.
Like the child that does 2,000 words for a 600-word essay.
My personal bugbear at the moment with the schools is these ghastly learning platforms, because then you get the fight for resources. The children have access to one computer, and they all need to download their homework now, and they all need to do it now, and they all... I'm not sure who's more stressed about it, them or me.
The limited physical resources.
Well, there's plenty of time for each of them to download it, but they all need to do it now. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Plus now, plus competition. Okay? Any others?
Possibly also when they're doing something that they would rather be doing and they should be doing work. So if you ask them while they're reading, you know, and they should really be doing something else, then they really don't want to stop what they're.
Isn't there just an opportunity cost to everything? And it links back to, you know, why should I? And you know, with kids like ours, we better have a good answer up our sleeve.
I think as well for me, I probably notice the stress more when I've had a really crap day. You know, I've been at work all day, I've had, you know, a tough afternoon or whatever, and I think I'm more conscious of it than if I've had a particularly sort of good day.
Sensitized by own stress, and that was something that was brought up by someone else, wasn't it? Yeah. It's another angle, but related. Okay. So again, because we're running out of whiteboard, how do you know? For we've already had the answer of aggression. Pardon? Huffing and puffing. And the shoulders.
Selective deafness.
Crying.
Wow, this is coming in too thick and fast. Huffing and puffing. It was crying and selective hearing, selective deafness.
Yeah.
Now there are different kinds of selective deafness. Of course, some of them are just they're really focusing on what they're doing and they really don't hear you because they really have tuned the whole world out and they are fully in a world of their own. That's different than pretending they didn't hear you. Yeah.
Just
I'm
have to
gonna
apply the ice cream test.
Pardon?
Just have to apply. Would you like some ice cream?
Yeah. Doing little whispers of things. We tease our daughter by saying, your pants are on fire. Whatever it is for your family.
In our family, it's with our son, I call it going ballistic because you mention it very carefully and instantly he's into orbit.
What does he do that makes you come to the conclusion that he's ballistically in orbit?
Because immediately he jumps up and stops what he's doing and starts flailing around and shouting. It's hard to miss.
What I'm bringing to your attention is that there are observable behaviors.
Yes.
The language from the child becomes irrational.
Becomes?
Irrational.
Irrational. Like?
I hate you, you always hate me, this homework is evil, I wish I could take it and shove it on Miss Watts's head. You don't love me anymore.
You sometimes get almost the opposite. You go super rational and very logical, very, you know, argumentative at a pedantic level about things. So it's kind of the almost opposite of that. Yes.
It's peculiar when a pedant becomes irrational.
Yeah.
I'm going to put down hyper-rational. Yeah?
It is, yeah.
Is it sort of an extreme mood change?
Yes, I'm going to write that down and then I'm going to say another comment about that. Definitely extreme mood change is that you'll see exhibited in their behavior. Just going to say one comment and then get yours. With the irrational languaging, there was a pattern that came out of Albert Ellis that he named in cognitive behavioral therapy, and it was globalizing in a catastrophic way. And so he's made, or she, he or she?
Either, choose.
Either one will make these leaps of cognitions and come to the worst possible conclusions. And remember, within attachment theory, that a parent hating you is really catastrophic. That is a big deal. So they're really, really terrified by their thoughts in that moment.
Sometimes, especially when this irrational language is coming out when they're not upset, you get really interesting revelations and names pop out of people, and you actually get quite an insight into the child's thought processes. But it is upsetting and disturbing when it happens.
The thing, well, we'll talk more about it, but the real key thing for you to do is not take any of it personally. None of it's about you, and that's really important to keep in mind. Because otherwise you get caught up in the drama, and then you're not containing the family environment anymore. Okay.
Another one I think also is...
oh, the guy up there, sorry. Yeah.
Just with our son, confusion. They forget what they know, and also, and then no longer able to understand explanations anymore that they normally would understand.
Yeah. Would it be okay if I summarize that as kind of a shutdown? Would that be all right? Does that capture it for you?
Well, it's their judgment.
Evidenced in their languaging and their responses to your attempts to assist.
There's also self-abuse, violence to self, like hitting yourself. Not my daughter, I know somebody else's child does it.
She says very carefully.
Yeah, my daughter's only 6, so I'd be very worried. They're hitting their head against the wall or hitting themselves because they're taking it out on themselves.
Yeah.
They also blaming your parents, blaming the parents for what they haven't done, and yet they blame the parents. I get quite a lot. It's your fault because I left the paper there and you tidied up. So I can't do my homework for the last 3 years.
So one thing is, don't give him any excuses. Okay, a couple more and then we'll move on. You and you?
Not been able to sleep.
Mm. Nightmares as well. Yep.
My daughter's irrational thoughts have gone from there's no point in homework for a few minutes to there's no point in living. I don't know how many other people have gone that far yet, but that was quite scary.
It's that catastrophic thinking.
That was scary for me and very difficult not to react to.
Yeah, and so we'll be arming you with interventions. Yeah, and I share your concern.
Do you mind if I add another when?
Sure.
When they're overtired.
Less resourced, overtired. And it happened to all of us. Absolutely.
Can I just say one because it's quite different to those, which is going quiet. It's like the opposite of that, isn't it?
Yeah. It's called avoidant in attachment terms. That there's a withdrawal from the world. If I just shut the world out, maybe all my problems will go away. Okay, we really unfortunately need to move on. There's very rich answers here though. So, isolation, lack of social interest, that's part of the withdrawal. And eczema, headaches, sleep disorders in terms of signs of study stress, anxiety, depression, not eating well or eating too much. And you've got all of the things over more study stress that comes out. And fitting homework in an otherwise busy life. And doing that kind of like you have 8 classes to go to this week in addition to school. And play. So to break down again into talking, how do you do stress in your family? Now families are systems. You have the different people involved. You have the people that may not be there in modern family constellations. And there's the contribution of each of the individuals, as well as how the cultural understandings of that family are. Like, it's okay to, you know, be violent to self or others, or it's okay to catastrophize, or it's okay to, you know, do whatever is that, you know, or it's not okay, and then there's culture about what's not okay. How do you do your stress? In our family, we've got different ways. I tend to get more irritated. Sasha tends to get kind of cold and very rational, and our daughter tends to melt down. and then what happens as a family, we organize. So if which one of us melts down first in our way of doing stress, the other one will come to our rescue. And then once we take care of each other, you know, like the airplane masks coming down, then we take care of Alia. So that's how we do stress in our family. And how do you help your children reduce study stress? How do you manage it? How do you see it, and what do you do about it?
I mean, with our daughter with 15, well, I see it as I take her a step back and say, don't worry about it, take a break, I'm away from this.
Right, I'll write that down, but yes, and talk amongst yourselves for now, and coaching them through it, through positive stuff, is one of the things I'm sure that will come up for many people. Trying to talk them out of it. How do you do stress? Of course, there's always, and who does it, right? In what way?
Can I say, collectively, we do all of it at different times without really a roadmap.
Your husband's gone really red in the face.
Depends on the day of the week. It's Monday or Friday.
These fraternities, whether it's just before school begins or whatever.
So you saw in your system there's a kind of turn-taking.
It is really, isn't it?
Well, those were your words. Isn't it interesting?
If it wasn't turns and you both all went at the same time, then yeah, that's when it gets...
Oh, we've done that. We've done that one. We live in a very large extended house with a bunch of females and some males, and the females will go, and they'll all go. And the best one was when I threw a packet of cornflakes up, you know, poof, and it was quickly followed by my daughter throwing one of those great big 2-pint things of milk up the window.
How old was she at the time?
Oh, 23. It was the thing that stopped us, though.
Gotta clean that up.
Clean it up before Dad comes back.
So, no matter what age they are, children model you.
Yes.
You are teaching them, by the way you do stress, you are teaching them how to be in the world. There are some thought patterns that you just don't have access to, obviously, and there are things that your children will exhibit. They're like, where did that come from? Nevertheless, children model you.
We're not aligned in what stresses us and how we deal with stress, so they see completely different things happening. So a situation that might stress me wouldn't stress him, how I would, you know. So, I don't know, it just makes it tricky.
Is there a question? I think there might be a question there. That's how do we do it if they're trying to model two different reactions to stress?
They have both modeled for them. Pick and choose, so like a buffet table. Yeah. But it's also, how do you negotiate the differences?
Yeah, because then the next step is dealing with whatever it is, and we'd have different approaches.
And so, for instance, the way we negotiate it, would you like to say, Sasha?
No.
Okay.
We don't have Sebastian Edwards' parents in here, do we? No? No? Thank you.
The way we negotiate, is it okay if I say how we negotiate?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, so the way we negotiate it is, especially around homework, because that tends to come up the most, is if he's dealing with it, he's going to deal with it. Unless something really major is kicking off and then the other one comes in on a white horse to rescue. So even if we're going to do it differently, we still back off. And we talk about it later. Later. Yes?
Who do you rescue?
Well, the parent first. So first is like, hey, okay guys, stop and breathe, calm down here. And then it's talking to the adult, or who's supposed to be an adult anyway, if we're going to pull in transactional analysis stuff. Help them, get them back into parent and adult, and then help the child. Because then the child is seeing there's an intervention happening, and they get that space. But that's the way we do it. You know, every family's going to come up their own way.
When I've been alone at home, I've taken myself to the naughty step.
I've
taken myself to the naughty step.
To the naughty.
We call it the naughty step. That's what everyone knows it as. Because we sent them there to calm down.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what? I need some calm down time. So.
You should put a kettle on your naughty step.
Yes. No, because if there was, it would have been thrown a long time ago.
I'm summarizing ours as negotiated territories.
So the children get sent there, and I send myself sometimes.
Good parental accountability, I like that.
I need a space. Maybe it's not the step. Maybe it's up to my own room. Maybe it's up to the garden. I take myself out of the equation. And for them to understand what I'm doing, I sometimes use the step.
I'm putting healthy next to withdrawal. Okay, Aldana?
I'm generally pretty laid back, so mine builds. It builds slowly, my stress levels, and then and then I swear and whatever I need to do just to get the trouble is that my sons, well, both of them tend to be very laid back as well, which can sometimes be infuriating because it's, you know, they're sometimes too laid back that I don't have to worry, you know.
In your responses, I'm really hearing a real developing awareness of the individual and the collective interactions of the way you each individually do stress. If we move on to how do you reduce stress, we've already had the answer of perspective coaching. It's really, let's get this in perspective, it's really not what you think it is, it's not that bad. That's what you said, was that, do you remember that right? Great.
Take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not a complete break, it's saying, okay, you're stuck with the maths, let's do whatever instead.
Switch subjects?
Yeah, I think sometimes just breaking it down into, okay, so just do one page.
Yeah.
Just do one page and then have a break, but not letting them off the hook straight away, so they don't see it as an easy option way out.
In NLP, we call that chunking down. Yeah, just going to do little pieces.
If I can describe in the midst of this mayhem that might be unfolding around several people's stresses, one of the things that my family amongst themselves collectively have done is they might still be shouting, but they want to hug. And so Emily, the child, has come forward in the middle of being actually still very angry, and it's the, just get hold of me because it's horrible. And it doesn't necessarily stop that whatever it is that's going on, but it does take the, take some of the horribleness away. And so that happens quite a lot, and it's quite a good deflator.
So part of what you described is the activation of the attachment system, looking for that proximity and that comfort, and that is also part of reducing it. I saw a hand up. It's like, so. Okay. Green shirt and then Aldana.
Preparation strategies.
Preparation strategies. What's your name besides green shirt?
Aussie.
Aussie, thank you.
I think you see what my name is. In our family, the children are not allowed to start homework until they've come home from school, obviously, had a snack, had some playtime, and then sit down to do homework or screen time or anything like that.
So in your preparation, there's a culture, there's expectations, there's pre-negotiated agreements.
So I want them to see that they have a break, that life isn't all about following someone else's rules to study.
Mm.
We try and take it as a bigger picture. If he's stressing about something, then we'll homework or whatever, and we'll say, look, we only nag at you because we love you, if we didn't care, if we weren't interested in you as a person, we would step away and just let you get on with it and let you fail and let you do whatever it is you, but because that is why we nag, that is why we go on, because we love you, and we continuously tell him we love you, so it annoys him so much. I think he just doesn't want to hear it, so he's more likely to just get on with it.
Bless you. Being told he's loved should be the worst problem he ever has in his life. No, I'm sorry, I'm one of those people that, like many of your children, I'll be like, oh, pretty flower, and I kind of forget I'm going somewhere. And so we have time limits, and unfortunately we really need to move on, although I'm absolutely certain that what you're saying is going to be important. I'm really sorry. Okay. So, we got the taking rest. Doing physical exercise. Sometimes we get out the trampoline, it's like, right, do 5 minutes of that, work it out. And it's shockingly lovely. Sometimes we take turns on it as well. Changing study activities, we have, and sometimes power naps even. And then emotional, mental kind of things, the reframing, like the perspective coaching. Take it as practice, not a big deal. And then also looking for external help from people that you trust can actually offer something of decent quality. These are kind of the usual ways of tackling study stress, which we also do. It's one layer of it and is very important.
I've just got something we tried in the past which was very successful. And particularly in the summer when it's kind of bright in the mornings, we didn't do homework in the evening at all. It was all play at home in the evening. We went to bed at a reasonable time and just got up a bit earlier, or early enough to cover whatever number of bits of homework had to be done. And that was really good because everyone was really calm.
And
and there's also a focus of, you've only got a certain time and you have to leave school, so if it's not done by then, it's tough. And that time sort of pressure actually helps in a way. It's very strange, whereas the evening, it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes longer. Actually in the morning there's no option. And it's a bit like being more like being in a lesson at school.
So and then there's an external boundary at the time, so it's not about you.
In the winter, that was in the summer term, but it was quite successful.
Thank you for sharing that.
Isn't it interesting that so many things that are coming up now are about physical aspects rather than mental or psychological aspects? Because on your previous slide, a lot of the things you have written down about the previous were actually food, tiredness, that sort of thing. An exercise as well, so it's the physical thing as well. The human body is about chemistry.
Yes, we are embodied beings. We have embodied lives. We don't just live here. Absolutely. And even though the stuff that I'm talking about is going more to the psychology, as I said earlier, these things are also very important. What I'm looking for is a context for it as well that's going to slightly shift some of what you're doing. So instead of going into groups for this, I'd like you, well, Sasha, would you mind erasing again, please? Sure. Thank you. I'd like you to call out when I can write them down again. Things like, what does your kids' school or schools do? How do they help their kids? It could be not at all. It could be they make it worse. A few nods over, they make it worse.
In our experience, it's totally teacher dependent. It's not the school as a whole, it's each individual teacher that makes a difference, positively or negatively.
So left to teachers to manage.
There are some teachers our son wants to work for and he'll do anything for them. And other teachers that have managed to turn him off so much that he almost deliberately doesn't do anything.
And got to the point where he vocalises, oh, they're a rubbish teacher.
Yeah. And once his decision's made, his world is black and white, very, very well. That's it. You can't.
And so you've got his thought patterns of, I work for people that I care about. And so there's attachment issues here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then
he cares for us, but we ask him to do his homework.
different attachment systems have different relationships in it. Different relationships have different things triggered within the attachment system. It doesn't mean he's not attached, of course. Okay, lots of hands up. Let's start here.
Well, the school has a school counsellor, but also our younger daughter has a time-out card. So that if she's feeling distressed or there's something in the subject they're doing that is worrying her, she can show that to the teachers and she's allowed to go out of the lesson. They'll usually find somewhere for her to go to.
Does everybody have this timeout card, or?
No, it's people with, well, I think it's people who need it
Mm.
have one,
Okay.
basically.
I see.
The school setting clear expectations. One of our schools, very clear homework timetable, clear consequences if you don't do it, and they're acted upon. And the other school, it's a bit fuzzy. You might get homework, you might not. You might have to stay in at lunch to finish it, or you might not. And I don't think the second way around is helpful.
Other hands?
Yeah. My son's school do a rewards scheme, so if they do well in something, they get points for it. But they did a brilliant one the other day. He had to do tessellating shapes. He was desperate to get this homework one because the one who did the best got a chocolate bar.
Oh.
And the three best in the whole year, and there's I think 8 classes. There's a huge school. And the 3 best, and he got a chocolate bar, and that was what he was desperate to do that homework.
Oh, bless.
So it's all, rewards definitely work well at his school.
When they change the rules, sorry, but when they change the rules about rewards, that they see the injustice. She was told that top 3 will get a reward for this project, and then when it came to it, she rewarded 7 people in the class. So yes, he was one of the ones that got the reward, so he was partly happy with that, but he was still troubled that she changed the rules.
Oh, absolutely. Consistency. Yes.
My children's school have a golden jumper. So each class has 2 golden jumpers. And the 2 children are chosen each week, this is throughout the school, to wear the golden jumper. That's their uniform. But the interesting thing is that they don't do it on attainment, they do it on effort. So the whole school knows that these children in this class were the ones that made the biggest effort. Not necessarily came first, tried the hardest. And it's throughout the school. It works really well.
Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, our son is at primary school, and so he has a new teacher every year, and it's a struggle to get it every year. But we have got quite a good two-way communication between us and the teacher, so we understand hopefully what's been happening at school, how things are at school, and the teacher understands what things are like at home and what our son is like and how to work with him.
Yeah.
But it does seem like every year he's with a new class teacher and you have to go through the
All
whole
over
process
again. Yeah, and we have that with our school as well. When my father was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, the teacher gave our daughter less homework that week. Yeah, it's really nice to have that report. Separately.
Yeah, so we have that you can draw a graph with his effort and his attainment directly correlated with the teachers that he diagnosed with mine. His attainment doesn't really waver that much, but his effort.
Our school is just reporting we've not had any benefit or negative from it yet, but our school certainly reports where the child is in terms of the actual measured subject, but also their attitude and whether they think the child is meeting expectations. And it's not been of any use to us yet, but I think it will be with our next child a very good tool to see how
Is that kind of a version of this, separating out effort and attainment?
No, attitude. The child,
the child's
track the child's attitude.
Child's attitude.
Yes.
Okay. What I would encourage you to do is, if you like any of these ideas, write them down and bring them into your school. There was some really nice stuff talked about here. Obviously not the don't bother one. Room for one more? Okay. I'll leave that up. What amplifies it? Now we've spoken about a good deal of these things, and some of it is countered by what we already have on the board. Parents and teachers, or teachers, prioritizing achievement over emotional resilience, often ever so innocently, and schools that are, if your children are at the age where there are exam results that go on the internet, there's a lot of pressure for kids to do the school good. There's peer pressure we've spoken about. Pardon?
Year 6 SATs tests.
Yeah.
They are a lot of pressure to go and have breakfast at school together.
So they have more time to study?
And they're studying
It's to make sure
they
that
have some
children
breakfast.
breakfast and are at school on time.
Right.
Ours do not go to breakfast and are at school on time.
Children's beliefs. We've spoken about that from different angles in many ways so far. And internalizing the beliefs around them from other adults, but not sometimes just coming up with their own kind of crazy. Yeah? Their concept of failure, that they have a concept of failure. And of course, personalizing performance or catastrophizing it. Like, I don't have a reason to live. Oh, I'm going to go back. Each of these things come from beliefs and thinking. People take action and structure policies around and organize themselves around what they believe. So parents and teachers will organize how they support children, and they most often see it as support, although there are some bad apples around, based on their concepts, in other words, their thinking around achievement and well-being and what that means. Peer pressure comes from beliefs about how to be with each other. There are these stacks of beliefs. How should we be together? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? What's okay to do? What can I get away with? What do I feel like doing if I just express? Children's beliefs, that's thinking. Beliefs are just thoughts that don't get questioned anymore. And their concept of failure, concept, is a thought, or a series of thoughts, or layered thoughts. You can kind of see where I'm going to be going with this. Pressure is external. Fact is there are SATs. Fact is there are GCSEs and O levels, A levels, it's changed. A levels. Fact is that uni is expected for many of our children, and competition for spaces at the best places for them. That's a fact. That's just what's out there. What causes the stress, though, is the thinking about the pressure. The kinds of thinking that go on about the pressure is going to determine the existence and what level of stress there is. So in those moments where either Sasha and I are having some kind of expression of our stress, we have forgotten in those moments these things. So we remind each other compassionately. In the words of physicist David Bohm, who's considered one of the most influential philosophers and scientific philosophers of our time, he came to critique thought on his looking deeply into quantum physics and the impact we have when we observe a thing. Thought is a very powerful instrument, but if we don't notice how it works, it can also do great harm. It's the fact of our thinking which is the very most critical thing. Which is why I said in the beginning, if you get to know what stress really is, bingo, you got the most important diamond gem, the most important bit out of this whole presentation. Anyone want to challenge me on this? Anyone want to argue that stress actually comes from the external stuff? So you're all on board with this, 100% on board?
Stress is it can be a good thing though. I mean, you do need a certain amount of stress, don't you, to actually achieve things, I think.
We have some of these and some of these. And the juries, but different people are motivated in different ways by different things, and the motivations come from their filters of thinking. But it's also a tolerable level of stress. For those that find stress useful, it's a limited level. So people who are air traffic controllers thrive on pressure. They have thousands and thousands and thousands of lives completely dependent on them every day that they're at work. On their capacity to hold all that 3D space and all that movement would be an absolute nightmare for me. Totally incapable. Do not have that skill set. But they manage it with grace. Because they enjoy it. They enjoy that pressure. And if they experience a bit of it as stress, it's just a bit, and it's very manageable. And for other people, for people that went like this, that's because what you were thinking about was overstress, unmanageable stress.
Is it also perhaps how you interpret the physical attributes of stress? The adrenaline could be exciting, or the adrenaline could be terrifying. I'm shaking because I've gone to the dentist, or I'm shaking because I've rolled a roller coaster.
Yes, and
how you think about the stress influences it, not just what caused the stress.
That goes back to the issue of having an embodied life, and you're opening up a vast discussion. If you read the work of Robert Scaer, S-C-A-E-R, and what is it? Body Bears the Burden, I believe, although I could be wrong about that, is a really thick tome about describing the fight, flight, freeze, shutdown response and how that plays out in our thinking and our sense of self.
Sometimes the larger the stress or the expectation, if that is then conquered and achieved, then you have a much larger or greater sense of satisfaction, achievement of actually being able to see it, control it, beat it, and then achieve it. And so you get that great sense of achievement at the end of it. The difference between sort of walking from one end of a room to another to climbing up Mount Everest. It's a huge amount of stress for you to go up Mount Everest. But when you get there, you're going to feel rewarded.
Yeah, there are positive benefits of having, yeah. And so these challenges can be stressful or not.
And it's to actually try and turn it around so that they can see that there is something tangible at the end of it that is, it's worth doing it. It's worth dealing with it to get there rather than just doing a total shutdown and, oh, I'm not going to deal with that, and walking away from it, but to actually take it on and challenge it and try and achieve it.
So that's one of the ways that you would do perspective coaching.
That's
absolutely.
What we're trying to say to Harrison, look, it may be hard now, but these are your tickets to your future. Once you've got the tickets, you can choose what you want to do with it. But if you don't give yourself the choices, then you won't have those choices later on.
And you'll be a cleaner the rest of your life.
You say if you want to be a cleaner, and that's going to be what's going to make you happy, then at least you'll have had a choice to then choose to be a cleaner.
There's a lot of responses to this. I want to start here, but then also see if it's going, really keeping it focused on this model. Yep.
I don't know whether I'm overanalyzing this, but I tend to associate thought with emotion. It's the emotion behind the thought.
Yes.
That is a part. I assume when you use thought, you're sort of bundling them together.
Yes.
Because it's the emotion behind the thought that makes it pleasurable or scary. And the bigger the emotional charge, the bigger the stress.
Yes, you're raising an important point. We are only ever feeling our thinking. It could be nonverbal thinking, like that adrenaline rush. That's a thought. It's just a nonverbal thought. And then having to have the discernment of figuring out if it's fear or excitement. Absolutely.
I'm just struggling to tease out when the individual has to have their own beliefs in what is right for them. So the external stressor of expectation and so on. But for them, the anxious thinking, if you can remove that belief that that external expectation is relevant, then they can change their thinking, because it's about what they want and what they perceive. But I
want to point.
Of it is about.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Where you're going is looking at the structure of thought, and that is a very important place of intervention. We had a lot of lists of a lot of things that were really very helpful. All of those are on the structure of thought. What David Bohm is talking about is the nature of thought, the fact that we think, and the utter validity and criticalness of that. Well, criticalness isn't quite a word. Thought is a very powerful instrument, but if we do not notice how it works, it can also cause great harm. It's the that we think stuff. What does it mean that we think? What does it mean that our feelings come from our thinking? Whether it's storms of thinking like that wind outside, or something more calm.
Does it mean it's all personal? It's only what you've got to basically get to know yourself. So what works for your parents doesn't necessarily work for you. You've got to basically find yourself, what you find stressful in a bad way, and you've got to work out your own comfort.
That's a fantastic example of absolutely yes and absolutely not, all both at the same time. Yes, we must all find our own ways through our thinking. No one else can do that for us. You know, when our daughter is in meltdown because she's called, you know, she skipped 2 years and she's calling herself rubbish at math because she doesn't get something like this. I mean, you guys know about these things, right? She has to find her own way out of that. I can't go into her head and rescue her. I can only be on the outside coaching her through that. So absolutely yes. On the other hand, absolutely not. Back to this. Unless our children understand that it is their thinking that has them tortured in those moments, then they are disempowered from doing the most profound things they can do for themselves.
There is an element of choice in all of this as well. It's exactly the same situation with two different children in it. One will be absolutely fine and they'll say, okay, yeah, I messed up, that's fine. And the other one will get really stressed because they messed up. And there's an element, and maybe as you get more as you get older, but there's an element of choosing your response to a situation. So thinking it through, but in a kind of purposeful, more conscious way.
And choices came up.
Like an animal to it.
I think it was you actually that raised the issue of choices last year. I forget. No, the fellow in the back. Yes, very fundamental. That yes, this points to the fact that there's an issue of choice here. But because thinking, attachment, you know, you can't really sit down and reason with a horse. You can't sit down and reason with a mouse. You can't performance coach a squirrel. Yeah? These are all mammals, they all have attachment. Attachment is deeply subconscious stuff. A lot of our thinking is deeply subconscious and not amenable to verbal coaching. So the issue around choice can be a bit misleading. Choices have to be, it takes a lot of discipline to start getting in the habit of making different choices. And there has to be motivation behind that to get there. Okay, one more. And then we'll have to move on, sorry.
What you're saying is that if you don't realise it's a choice, it becomes fact.
Yes. Not just a fact, but a fact that the kids can beat themselves up with. An invisible fact, a fact that strangles them. There's a Bare Naked Lady song. When I was born, I was called strong boy, good boy, smart boy. And, you know, it's like, these are the things they strangle us with from our first breath. I'm mangling the lyrics, but that's the idea. So, you know, when we take these things in as expectations, as facts that cannot be questioned, everything can be questioned because it's all just thought. Everything, including peer pressure, including disliking a teacher, including what it means if they do or don't answer something easily or can handle something easily. I'm so sorry we need to move on, but this really is the most critical bit as well. To look, as this applies to study stress specifically, it's about the meanings that we're giving. Meanings are entirely 100% comprised of thought. If we prioritize academic achievement over a fulfilled childhood, anticipating that catastrophizing thinking, anticipating low performance and making that mean something awful. I had a friend whose daughter wound up dropping out of a very posh university. And it was all like, oh my God, her life is over. And then a few years later, she went back and she's absolutely fine. You know, we can get caught up in it as well. Thinking that happiness necessitates getting good education and a good job. No, happiness entitles having happy thoughts. It's really that simple. It's really that stupidly simple.
Isn't that the crux of all of this, really? Because being parents of the kind of children that we have, sometimes I can't help thinking, okay, well, you're a very bright child and you've got this wonderful future waiting for you. What are we really doing here? Should we not just let you go to local comprehensive and just go with the flow and have an easy life and just see where you end up. And there is a conflict there.
I think you're asking a different kind of question, although that is a very important one, and a cheaper one.
A less stressful one.
Yes, it changes the whole family dynamics, doesn't it? When your child knows that their happiness is not dependent on their exams or their scholastic achievement, they are then free to achieve. It's very ironic. You know, I often use the example of someone who's performing emergency surgery, and although may it never ever happen, if someone were performing emergency surgery on you, would you want that person to be really calm and really focused on what they're doing, or do you want them to be really anxious about what they're doing, even if they're just as focused? Absolutely. When you're chilled out and disinvested from outcome, you are free to achieve. You are free to do your best and give the best of yourself. So if you're, and rationally speaking, if your child is looking for the best possible achievement, the best way to achieve that is to not be stressed, which is down to them, ultimately.
How do you draw the balance of calm and sloping? So I want somebody to be calm, but alert. And a good example you gave about the surgery. So yes, I want him to be calm, or her, but at the same time very alert and taking it very serious. And children sort of can get sloppy if they don't feel important. This is important or not important.
There's a lack of focus, there's a lack of commitment. Those are just completely different things. Calm is the way you approach it, but you know what you think about the task. So the emotional state coming in, it's like being calm, but being, I would consider being laid back just different, just uncommitted and not attached, not bothered, not really engaging. So it's just people can be calm and engaged or calm and disengaged. They're just separate things.
So when they're calm and unengaged, and then you say, okay, you're calm and unengaged, now let's do your homework and explode, and we just made them stressed.
Oop, just popped your calm balloon, huh?
But doesn't it go backwards in a way? Because in order to be calm when you approach something and disengage, you have to have the right thoughts about it.
Well, to kind of tie these things together, a lot of your interventions happen before you sit down to do homework. You know, not when the explosions happen or the withdrawals happen or the balloon gets popped, but having discussions about, you know, what does it mean for you to be calm? What do you think about it? Having these discussions before, and to separate out those things about being committed and calm. Or someone who could be calm and very vengeful, for instance. You know, there's all sorts of things that can go along with calm that aren't very nice.
But a lot of people work better under stress. They achieve much better. Yeah, but they just do a lot better. I mean, especially creative people, they tend to achieve.
If that floats their boat, fine.
If they were calm and didn't have a deadline, then they probably wouldn't do so well. Whereas if it was, right, we've got to get it, then some people just, if they focus and get on with it and do it.
When you say deadlines, what's being spoken about here is external deadlines. So for instance, when I was doing my PhD, I had very rigid times where I had to submit drafts and redrafts for each chapter. And my now ex-husband would question, he's like, those aren't real deadlines. I'm like, yeah, they are. And in my cohort, I was the only one to finish on time because those deadlines were really meaningful to me and I had the discipline to keep them meaningful. Now I just need to have a drink. And when we talk about creative people, we're also talking about using creativity as kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? A duck blind to hide behind, to excuse being disorganized and undisciplined. No, I have to be in the right space. Which is true, but not to be exaggerated and milked. I don't remember if we went through all these points or not. Did we do thinking the outcome of study impacts our psychological well-being? I don't think so. Okay, so thinking that the outcome of study impacts our psychological well-being. I will feel good if I get a good grade. The locus of happiness has been situated outside. And in that person's world, they are phenomenally vulnerable.
But what if having a good grade motivates the child? What if they feel it was worth the effort because I had a good grade?
Nothing wrong with that. However, or also, thought is a very powerful instrument. But if we don't keep in mind how it works, it will bite us in the butt. It's absolutely fine to take pleasure in one's accomplishments, but to think that the happiness came from the accomplishments rather than our thinking about the accomplishments is something else entirely.
Because if you get a bad grade, you can collapse.
Because there's this magical thinking, like Santa Claus exists or the Tooth Fairy, that these things have the magical power to make us feel something. You know, and there's an intervening factor. Oh, I pressed a button, I hope I didn't ruin it. There's an intervening factor, like with Santa Claus, there's parents. You know, with thinking, there's thought.
Apart from the fact that you can't have a one-to-one correlation between your effort and your result, because there could be other factors going on. Maybe they gave you an exam paper which covered some topics which you didn't study because they hadn't been covered in school.
Oh, were you sitting at our kitchen table last year? Yeah. Yeah.
It happens to us all the time.
Having these discussions is very important, but often, again, before it blows up as an issue. Because then they're invested and really lost in their thinking. It's having the anchors beforehand. Did any of you ever see a Disney version of Mulan? And there's so Summer Yes, Summer No. There's this trio of comedy characters, and one of them is this really big guy that gets very explosive, I think. No, the little guy gets very explosive, and the big guy goes, kind of rocks him and kind of meditates him and kind of gets him calm again. You know, those things are arranged already. He knows that's going to happen. The little guy knows that the big guy's going to pick him up and hold him. And he likes that, and they've agreed to that together. And it works better that way. So, what reduces study pressure are the practical, embodied, worldly things that we have been speaking about. Planning the study work, having the resources, as much as you can. If it's a school, there's nothing you can do about that. Or that's my thinking anyway. Clear boundaries. Clear boundaries over deadline, study, rest, balance, and supportive family and learning environment, which is what we'll be speaking about later today as well in detail. Which this stuff will be coming up again in terms of the thinking. Because it all comes down to that. Because you are only ever feeling your thinking. Which is why, in addition to supportive school environment in terms of reducing study pressure, what reduces study stress is emotional resilience. If you get that it is your thinking, that is the core of your emotional resilience. Not having great techniques of being on the trampoline. The core of everyone's emotional resilience is ultimately a feeling of internal okayness. Ideal study environments, again, thinking structurally. There are physical things, being tidy, kind of free from or at least a manageable or tolerable or culturally agreed level of noise. Some people really like to work to really high levels of heavy metal music. I can't do that. Mental, and ergonomic as well, the table being at the right height. It can cause children a lot of actual physical stress to writing with their arm too high. Mental, adequate learning resources, appropriate help from parents, and leisure time, which we'll be speaking about as well. Emotional, being okay to make mistakes and teaching them that it's okay to make mistakes. When we taught our little girl how to read, the biggest lesson wasn't learning how to read, it was learning it was okay to get a question wrong. Social, the culture of learning in the family, separate from entertainment, kind of, you know, like social things, like let's socialize. And spiritual, the S word. And yes, I am an intellectual, I am a PhD, and I use the S word regularly. Beliefs about the purpose of learning and higher meaning. What does it mean? and keep on chunking up and getting the broadest possible view, and think about that. Maybe think about that as a family. What does it mean? Have a family meeting, Stephen Covey style. Stephen Covey did 7 Habits of Highly Successful Families.
So can I ask a question? Why separate culture of learning in the family separate from entertainment?
Because the culture of learning is an independent sort of thing. So, for instance, my mother, it's really funny. It's not going to start out funny, but it will end that way, I promise. My mother was a hardcore drug addict. Okay, told you, not a funny start. But she was out of her mind, just on so many chemicals, so much at the time. But you know, we're Jewish, and there's a huge cultural legacy of being Jewish about education, education, education. So she would just grab enough lucidity out of her fog to say, education is the best way forward, and kind of stumble back to bed. So in our family, the culture of learning was very separate from the social. Yeah? Make sense? When you think of a culture of learning, you don't think of a drugged out mom, right? I'm taking a guess here, but I think it's a pretty reasonable one.
When I think of a culture of learning, I think of we went on holiday to Disneyland, but we also went to Monet's house in Germany and went to the museum there for the Impressionists. It's all...
So part of your culture of learning is that you integrate it. Great!
You enjoy it, that it's fun, that culture of learning and culture of entertainment.
Okay. But are you hearing that part of your culture of learning is that you integrate it with the social?
Yes.
So that's part of your culture. Fine.
But you say separate from entertainment.
Yes, like you can put salt and pepper in the same soup, but salt and pepper are still different ingredients.
Okay, yeah, if you say talk about it as different ingredients, that speaks to me.
Okay, good, found the right metaphor. What, time fillers, okay, quality time versus time fillers. Quality leisure and rest time, truly resting. Walking, napping, reading, coming together at meal times are typical kinds of things. Versus time fillers, things you don't quite feel rested about. And if you ever have trouble after going to sleep after watching like 2 hours of telly, just something kind of not quite restful about it. Video games is absolutely typical. Why is leisure time important? Recharging?
Communication.
Pardon?
Communication.
Communication. What about communication?
It's an opportunity to properly communicate as opposed to doing it while you're doing a time filler.
So connecting, building relationships. Mm-hmm.
This might be too basic, but it reminds you what makes you happy. So when it goes into when you're going into work or doing something that might be stressful, you can think, oh, they're two separate things.
Okay, I want to just tease that out and get that language really clean. I've got no argument with the fundamentals of it's important to do stuff but it's the stuff that triggers these happy feelings inside. The reconnecting with your inner peace, your happiness, but it doesn't come from the activity. It's that the activity allows that to arise within us.
Showing the children that their choices are important and respected.
I think the changing of setting as well.
What about the changing of setting?
Well, get it so that you're not always in the same place. A variety of going to the park, going swimming, going just moving about, I think is very good for you. Very healthy to keep changing.
Absolutely. Norman Doidge, I think it's about brain plasticity, but I forget the title of the book, talks about that very thing. You want to avoid Alzheimer's? Have a lot of change in your life. Keep on going, keep learning. So question for you guys together. We're going to have to do this very briefly, though. I can tell from Sasha's eyebrows. What do you do well to create a learning environment, and what might you do in your family to improve your learning environment? Okay, you're going to have to process as we speak as well, apparently. Ideal learning environment. What do you do? What have you already got in place that you can share with each other and become conscious of yourself?
Lack of distractions.
Lack of distraction. Uh-huh.
Organisation.
Organization. Organizing what?
Making sure you've got the right things in the right place at the right time to carry out your task.
Okay, so don't hide his home. For us, it's having the rubbers around.
Incentive.
Incentive.
being engaged.
Supervisable location.
Being engaged and supervisable location. And when you said being engaged, that's the parent being engaged or the child or both?
It's the relationship between it's the parent-child, but presumably also parent-child-teacher. If you're engaged with each other, it doesn't really matter where you are.
Okay, and it was being engaged in what was the other one again?
Supervisable location.
Supervisable location. That's very important. Uh-huh.
Somewhere that's safe.
Ain't that the truth? As opposed to unsafe. Can you name an unsafe environment that you've protected your children from? Or you're just thinking in general
No,
it's
just
important?
You're going to feel more comfortable and safe. It goes, I guess it reflects on the distraction and stuff like that.
Our daughter doesn't like doing homework if she's alone in the house.
Mm.
She doesn't mind being alone in the house, she doesn't like doing homework. Too focused in a quiet, unsafe environment. But it is safe, but she doesn't feel safe.
Okay,
So
well, I understand that from an attachment perspective. She's wants to have the other safety offloaded to someone else so she can just be free to focus and not have her guard up. Okay? Were there hands up here? No? Okay, one more.
Possibly being, lit well so that they're not straining where it's, poor
Real
light or poor
practicalities.
sound or poor,
I bet loads of people here have interrupted their child reading in semi-darkness. Okay. What can you improve?
Background music.
Background music without help or distraction.
Try.
You ask. And try. And then ask again. How'd that work for you? So may I also put on here, ask? Would that be okay to put on? I'm going to put on really big. Get your kids involved, especially our kids. They love it. They love being involved in making decisions, don't they? Okay, what else?
The timing issue has been quite interesting, to have a set amount of time. Because otherwise, I'm just going on for hours.
Yep. Sometimes we use timers. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a total change. If we're struggling because there's a meltdown, maybe actually it'd be better if you've worked on the floor.
Yep.
Rather than at the table.
With the time thing, our son didn't get time as a concept. Nothing happens, sometimes God is an hour. So we tried the 1 hour to now we're going out. Now we physically lost the time to do it. We have the lighthouse thing and tried the stopwatches and everything else. And the ball doesn't explode when the time ends. So what difference? And the issue we have at school is that they give him 20 minutes on this task. He can spend 20 minutes thinking about the first question before he's actually done anything.
Okay, so then that's done, and that's his homework, and he gets that in and it gets graded. What's the problem?
So if he could do it all in about 6 minutes and be done, on to the next thing, and he just doesn't do it.
We have the same issue. You work through different ways of working consequences. I'm going to put up here, be flexible. Try different things.
So you say it's okay just to let him do the 20 minutes of thinking about it and then hand nothing in basically and then see what happens?
Yep.
That's the way I always, at school, any exams, I would read through the whole thing at least once. I just had to sort of, I don't know, get into like the mood. I found it very difficult to write. I had to read it through and get it in my head, and I was always probably the last one to, and that just worked better for me. I found it a lot easier that way.
Because you actually get emotion things.
But yeah, but it was obviously a lot later than everybody else, and then I was tended to be rushing, and yeah, I must admit, I didn't always finish what I wanted to, but that was the way I worked, always.
Sorry to pull it back with time. What you could also do is you can write on the homework, genuinely thought about for 20 minutes. He did work on it for 20 minutes. He did do the task.
And what I sometimes find is that other teachers, sometimes if somebody has spent X amount of time thinking about it, they've written 2 lines, they can be superb. So
I'm sorry to interrupt. There's one that's not on here that I was banging on about as the most critical thing. Come on, guys.
Parents stepping away? No?
That can also be a critical thing, but what would David Baum answer? Question the thinking behind what's going on. Could you there's a really good conversation going on in the back. Would it be okay to share? Even if it's dissenting and disagreeing,
sorry,
please.
I was just commenting on this gentleman's comment about how if you've spent the time getting to the point where you've written just one line down in an answer, it just struck me that that's the difference between writing a novel and writing poetry.
I was thinking about poetry as well when he was talking.
You condense something down to that point where it's something more pure.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that too.
And what is actually true is that the person who's really thinking, they can look us for all the world that they're daydreaming, and they're not.
Yeah.
Could I comment again on that 20-minute issue, because we've had that problem as well, and with maths. So what we did was we broke the homework down into 2 chunks. 10 minutes is spent with one of us talking about the homework, reading the questions, just discussing it, and then the 20 minutes time to do your homework began when we stepped out of the equation. So the thinking was guided thinking, you might say, maybe? And
well, visible, because there's this supervision theme, so there's supervisable thinking.
But then it's sort of like being a facilitator for her thinking, so she can ask the questions she's worried about.
Yep.
So then we step back, she's got 20 minutes on her own, but she's still worried.
That's a good one. I need to move it on. What is resilience? We've been speaking about this. Peter talked about this yesterday, that bouncing back bit. Being able to feel what you feel, because we all get lost in our thinking. We're all embodied. We all have embodied experiences, and the physical can let us down. It's ultimately, but bouncing back is comprised of, is taking responsibility for one's emotions. You didn't pop the calm balloon, they did. Lack of drama or quick drama, or at least self-aware drama, at the very least. Knowing that you can do something about or bear an emotional state. I'm feeling really crap right now, but I'll move through this. It's not going to be forever. It feels like it. It feels like the end of the world. Nah, it'll pass. Ability to remain focused under pressure, i.e. SATs, test conditions. And ultimately, that safety net of that deep okayness. It's like that okayness is the safety net underneath someone walking on a tightrope or in climbing the top rope, that if you fall off the wall, you just kind of dangle and swing a bit. Resilience is about the capacity to manage strong feelings and emotions, which come from our thinking, because that's all they can ever come from. Resilience involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed, that we will be racing through. Emotional pain is exquisitely unavoidable. It is a fact of life. Life is, in the words of Sydney Banks, a contact sport. Everyone's going to have grief. Building resilience is likely to cause considerable emotional distress. But of course, so is not building resilience. In fact, not building resilience is a guarantee to have greater emotional distress in one's life. This is more about the foundations of resilience. Peter talked about some physical things to do, but the actual foundations of them is recognizing the nature of our thought. We never experience what happens directly, ever. We only experience our thinking about what happens. And there's a constant tension between the ego basically the personal, the story, and that deep, unchanging okayness, the inner wisdom. Now, we talked about discipline earlier. Discipline is not punishment. Here this says, for your punishment, write 100 times, I will not waste my time on meaningless tasks. Reliance is a critical component of discipline. Knowing that you can come back to a task over and over, you're going to be okay. Critical component of achievement, however achievement is defined, whether it's bouncing a ball against a wall or learning probability theory. And George Leonard wrote The Path of Mastery, talks about discipline throughout. The need to really struggle through those plateaus, the times where it seems like nothing's happening, and just stick with it and stick with it and stick with it. It's very important to comprehend the importance of the plateau and thinking, just in terms of the way we learn as humans as well. Highly recommend the book. Doing what you want to do, even when you don't feel like doing it, is the essence of discipline. So how do you, we talked about how you see stress. How do you see resilience? Minimal temper tantrums, if any. Responding philosophically, like our daughter had her Vega kind of run out of battery. She's like, it's okay, my happiness doesn't depend on the Vega having batteries. You could hear our voices coming out. Not being stressed about exams. Calling you out when you fall off your own thought wagon. Being stable in competitive environments. And remaining calm when they make mistakes. And the capacity to listen to reason. Being able to step away from the wonky thinking. We have a joke in our house, step away from the thinking. You know, like police cars, you know, step away from the car. Step away from the thinking. So part of building the humor in as well for us is important. Cost of not building resilience. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific, including what Peter talked about yesterday, with teenage girls getting a sharp drop in IQ up to 20 points lasting until they're 40. Underperformance, neurological disorders, being suicidal, eating disorders, afraid to take risks, shutting down and withdrawing from life itself, withdrawing from personal relationships, from you, inability to perform successfully when there's competition involved because they think there's a judgment about themselves. Not being able to make stable friendships. It's phenomenally costly. How do you build it? Do it yourself. If you don't step away from your own thinking, you won't be able to do much for your kid. If you don't have a system with your partner, if you have one, to help you step away from your thinking, there's not much you're going to be able to do. Through parenting, you have the talks before, and then as they arise, you shepherd them through it. Develop a worldview that supports resiliency for yourself. If you come home and like stomp around yourself and, oh, that boss, rah, 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 what are you teaching your kids? And if you need to, let someone else help you, bless you. The methods of building resilience, as opposed to these cool things we have about ideal learning environment. Learn yourself and teach yourself techniques to release challenging emotions. Okay. Everyday life has challenges, so there's plenty of opportunity to fall off your thought wagon and get back on again. That's the bouncing back bit. That's the bit to demonstrate. And to be conscious of that and name it for your child. Like, did you see what I just did? Good me. And you can joke around about it, sure, it's true, and they can think you're corny, but they're still learning. And including get your children's school to develop a well-being policy. Techniques. Emotional freedom technique is, as you all may know if you've ever met me before, is one of my personal favorites. It's really easy to learn. But also easy to learn are reframing and cognitive behavioral tricks. I saw a book yesterday by Sue Beaver, which I think was NLP for Better Parenting or something. Beaver, B-E-E-V-E-R. It's one of the good ones out there. It's chock full of tips. Really easy to understand. Mindfulness, making yourself aware, intervening in your own thinking, making the gap for yourself. And that inner wisdom paradigm, EFT and the inner wisdom paradigm together. You're okay no matter what happens. We're going to skip EFT, however, because you can look that up on the internet.
Left turn. Thank you. Thank you.
Inner wisdom, deep sense of peace, inspiration, intuition, detachment from outcome. It's okay no matter what grade I get on this. And ultimately, again and again and again, if we're only ever feeling or thinking, we're the ones thinking. It's our responsibility. How do you connect to it? Well, again, we're embodied, we go to practical things. Physical things like exercise, walks, Having a shower, just having that complete change of scene someone mentioned earlier. Meditation. Ultimately, it's that whatever you do, that's an aide de memoire for you to step away from your thinking, to have a different thought, to recognize that you've been flooded. I'm going to skip that. How can you, we'll end it here. How can you incorporate the inner wisdom paradigm in helping your child reduce their stress? What can you do from what you now know about where stress really comes from? Call it up. Don't project your stress onto them.
Acknowledge your stress.
That's fantastic. Acknowledge when you're stressed. By not just saying, I'm stressed, but I'm stressing myself with my thinking. One more. You need to pick up your kids. One more.
Don't catastrophize.
Don't catastrophize. Don't model all that catastrophizing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.